The latest figures from the South African Police Service reveal that 306 children were murdered during the first 3 months of this year. This is an increase of 37.2% from the same period last year. Now, most of these children are all under the age of 17. The killing of 4-year-old Bokgabo Poo, whose body was found in an open field in Tamboville, this is near Benoni, in the latest, or should I say, is the latest of these senseless murders. And for more on what is driving this surge in child murders, we're joined in studio by Criminologist Dr Gerard Labuschagne, and joining us via the virtual platform is the National Coordinator for Missing Children South Africa, Bianca van Oswegen, and we are also joined by Stanely Malematja. He is the attorney at the Center for Child Law at the University of Pretoria. To all of you, thank you very much for making the time for this discussion. Let me start with you, Bianca, and these are very unsettling statistics. Over 300 children killed in South Africa, and I think this is in this year alone. What is driving the murders against children?
Yes, this is unimaginable. That is what is happening in our country with the amount of children being murdered. And most of them actually end up on my desk first as a missing child and unfortunately then being found brutally murdered or raped. So we've seen this increase. I think crime in general has increased in our country. We've seen poverty that has also escalated this crime to the point of where the kidnappings have escalated to ransom demands. People are trying to make money out of crime. But when it comes to our children being murdered, it's just shocking. It's out of free will that the people are doing this. And we've seen it being related to traditional medicine, muti murders that are happening. We've seen children being murdered just by pure for the purposes that we don't know what personal purposes these people have. But unfortunately, we have seen that some of these perpetrators are either out on bail or parole. They are reoffenders. And also something that we've picked up is that some of these perpetrators are actually known to the children, family members, family friends, people within our community. It's people that these children are supposed to trust.
I want to come to studio, to you, Dr. Labuschagne. You have heard Bianca say that some of these children are being murdered for muti purposes. And I want to ask you to take us into the mind of a person who abducts a child, does whatever it is that they see fit with the child, and in the end, they not only kill this child, but dismember them. Why would a person do that to a child?
Well, as you point out, Collie, muti murder is one part of one example of a child murder, and I would like to say it's not the most frequent example, right. But of course they do get our headlines when they do happen. There's quite a wide spectrum of reasons. But if we just stick with that particular example, it's really a perversion of traditional beliefs. You know, the overwhelming majority of traditional healers do not do this at all and are very outspoken against this type of practice. But it's those who, like with many people who pervert religious beliefs and other belief systems to their own twisted benefit. And very often, you know, the person who's committing the murder is not the traditional healer. They're doing this on the instruction of another person, or they themselves are trainees of a particular traditional healer. And they go out and obtain these body parts. So for them, obviously, the justification is that this is part of an established, in their minds, belief system, and it's justified in terms of what they want to do and the motives of what they're trying to achieve with it. But of course, we still have to ask the question, what kind of person would be able to feel that way, even though there's a belief system structure above them? So, I mean, again, that's difficult. I don't think we really have studied murderers in South Africa, child murderers at least, well enough to say, are you specifically going to be a psychopath? Some might be, some might not be. And of course, then if you look at the other motives, we have very different reasons behind them why they might be occurring.
Let's come to you, Advocate Malematja. You have heard Bianca there saying that some of these people who do this to children, they are either on bail or are on parole. Do you think that the South African legal system is working to protect the most vulnerable? I'm not sure what question to ask here. You are the expert in this, but tell us what it is that is wrong with the system that allows for these people to get out and re-offend, because that's the problem.
Yeah, look, I will have to agree with Bianca there that most of this people who commit these heinous offenses are either re-offenders or they are out on bail. Now, I'm not sure whether, for a lack of a better word, is that the unfortunate part is that bail is not a privilege, but a constitutionally guaranteed human right. And as a democratic society, our first stance is that a person is innocent until proven guilty. And, in the provisions of Section 35 of the Constitution, it goes on further to say that an accused, detained, or suspected person has the right to be released from custody at the first appearance. So now that means that if a Stanley is arrested, he has the right to be released within 48 hours from, detention. But also we need to be mindful of the yardstick that is considered when someone is to be released on bail. We have two of them. First, it is the interest of justice. If the interest of justice permits for the release of that person from custody, and if the court is satisfied to that fact, then that person will be released. Then we have another one. We have the exceptional circumstances. And this is, I think it fits in, perfectly with the tragedy of the little child that was brutally murdered. Is that if a person is charged with a Schedule 6 offense of the Criminal Procedure Act, and some of those offenses include a rape of a minor child, that person must prove that there are exceptional circumstances that exist within the interest of justice that permit for the release of that person. So I would say here the issue is within the implementation, because the intention of the legislature when they drafted the provisions of Section 60 of the Criminal Procedure Act, and particularly the yardstick of the exceptional circumstances, is that it was trying to make it as hard as possible or close to impossible that a person charged with a Schedule 6 offense is not released on bail until they've faced, the consequences of the law. So I guess it goes to implementation, and questions need to be asked. What were those exceptional circumstances that permitted or which existed within the interest of justice that a person who was accused of raping a 9-year-old child was released on bail without any reasonable conditions that were placed there? Because, Section 62 of the Criminal Procedure Act allows the court to place reasonable conditions to ensure the protection of the greater society and any other individual. So I guess, the issue goes with the implementation of this existing laws, especially insofar as the bail system is concerned.
All right. You've said quite a bit, all of you, and we are going to continue this discussion in a moment. Bianca, I'd like for you to start thinking about a response as to whether or not parents sometimes are to blame for children going missing. It's a hard one, but it's one that we have to ask as to what responsibility do parents bear when a child goes missing. You're watching Newsfeed AM. If you're just joining us, we are in the middle of a discussion about why it is that the law is failing our children, but at the same time, what about the responsibility as a parent who brought this child to this earth? What responsibility do we bear as parents for the safety of our children? And let me reintroduce my guests. Bianca van Oswegen is with the National Coordinator. In fact, she is the National Coordinator for Missing Children South Africa. And we also have Stanely Malematja. He is an attorney, and he's with the Center for Child Law at the University of Pretoria. And sitting with me in studio, Dr. Gerard Labuschagne, a criminologist. Let me come to you, Bianca, that question just before the break, the responsibility of parents. What responsibility does a parent bear if and when a child goes missing? And what does the law say, by the way?
Definitely. All parents, guardians have the responsibility to look after their children. Now, unfortunately, we don't, want to blame parents for this, but sometimes in some cases, the negligence of parents actually contributes to the case of a child going missing. For instance, leaving them alone at home, having them go play in a park by themselves without adult supervision, or even waiting before opening a missing persons case, as there's no waiting period in reporting a person or a child as missing. Yeah. People are still under the impression that they have to wait 24 hours, but that does not exist. So the responsibility comes back to the parents, to the guardians in the safety and the education of safety on how they should take care of their children and teach their children how to keep themselves safe in certain situations. But it's very important. It's the responsibility of each and every South African to look after our children. Our children are our future. It takes a village to raise a child, but it takes a village to look after a child.
Dr. Labuschagne, let's come to you. Is that a fair question to begin with?
Look, I think, as Bianca says, there are certain realities in life that you have a lot of single parents. We have people who are struggling to find employment. They have to work long hours far away from home. So if we just say it's, parents will be more responsible, that's not actually addressed in the reality of many South Africans' circumstances. Yeah. So yes, you do find that you're obviously much more vulnerable as a child if you don't have any adult supervision. So it's a yes or no. Should we blame the parents? It's a difficult one to say, should we blame them? Because, as I said, there are certain just realities that, the parents don't have control over. Yeah. But yes, lack of supervision, I think, is a risk factor for kids becoming targeted.
Mr. Malematja, let me come to you. And it's a different question for you. And I'm going to kick it off with a direct quote from the Police Minister, Bokgabo. And this is on the recent case of baby Bokgabo. He says, and I quote, "Police spend 6 months chasing a suspect. With the stroke of a pen, the magistrate gives them bail. After they run, police are expected to find them again. Where will they find them?" This is Minister Bokgabo quoted in the Sowetan this week. The minister does have a point, does he not? But then, how do you align the criminal justice system so that it works as a coherent system, so that they're not failing each other?
No, he does have a point, and even though it's a difficult question. Now, when I was preparing for this discussion, right, I found that during the apartheid era, there was a law that permitted for the arrest and detention of a person for a period of 90 days without giving that person an opportunity to appear before a judicial officer. Now, we would understand that, when we entered into a constitutional democracy, some of the objectives of the Constitution was to undo the past injustices. Now, I would, in such cases, agree that undoing those past injustices rather was not done with caution, and also given that, society evolves, and the more that society evolves, the levels of, violent crimes also evolve in that nature. And, I will go back to my earlier statement to say that, the issue here is implementation. And that's where we need to start probing, even also from the side of the National Prosecuting Authority. How is it that they couldn't prove? Because, when one applies for bail is an application, and that matter, it's civil in nature, and the parties arguing have to prove on a balance of probabilities. So we also need to probe, on both sides, that how is it that they couldn't prove on a balance of probabilities that if this person is released out into society, they will be they will become a danger into society. And also, not to be harsh, I also take cognizance of the fact that, at that given time when that particular person appeared before a magistrate, at that time when they were making arguments for their release on bail, there might have been exceptional circumstances that permitted their release on bail. But I think that, the law needs to be tightened. what is exceptional, cannot just end up by saying it is because the accused person has a chronic or a serious illness, because that actually, in bail application, it is, and it can be taken as an exceptional circumstances. If as an exceptional circumstance, if an accused person says, look, I have a chronic illness, and it is proved that the Department of Correctional Services does not have the type of chronic medication that I take. So if I am incarcerated pending trial, it will be a gross violation of my fundamental human rights. And that's why I'm saying, the law really needs to be tightened. And the aim is that it needs to be made critically difficult or close to impossible for any person charged with such an offense to be released on bail. I think, again, my point, it goes back to implementation. And unfortunately, these are some of the rights that people are afforded under, a constitutional democracy.
Yeah. Dr. Labuschagne, I want to come quickly back to you because you're also familiar with the criminal justice system. We have a case at the moment. It's the Hillary Gardi matter. The family has decided that they're going to sue correctional services because one of the accused in her murder, Rasinkuna, I think is the name, it was found that he had broken his parole conditions. He had absconded basically for 2 years, and the family is arguing that had the system made it a point that when he decided that he was going to break the parole conditions, he's re-arrested. Instead, he was allowed to continue roaming the streets, and they're very clear that their daughter would still have been alive had the authorities did what they were supposed to do. Is that what it will take to protect the vulnerable in society?
Well, I applaud the Gardi family, and I think sadly there's a lot of other families that don't have the resources to take correctional services to court. But I do think correctional services doesn't want to learn. They don't want to listen. They need to drastically revamp the whole parole system, if anything, just for violent criminals and sexually violent criminals. For other crimes, I think that's a separate story. I have sat on some parole boards, and I cannot fathom and understand how these people think. We don't have experts sitting on the parole board. The parole board is, 1 or 2 members of correctional services, 1 or 2 members of the community. Yeah. They receive expert reports. They then have to try and interpret an expert report. And I've seen the most bizarre recommendations made by parole boards, to which my response is, it's about as crazy as me telling an orthopedic surgeon what to do with an operation when I'm not an orthopedic surgeon. There are not psychologists, criminologists, social workers actually on the parole boards. And we're not monitoring for corruption. I mean, if we say that we can believe a policeman can be corrupted in his duties, a prosecutor can be corrupted, a magistrate can be corrupted, how about the people who have the power to release someone halfway through their sentence? If we're not doing lifestyle audits on those people, and secondly, there's no comeback. There's no outcome for parole boards when they do make these bad decisions and release someone into the community who reoffends in a similar manner. There's no consequences for those individuals. So I think we need to start taking the parole boards and holding them accountable. We need to start doing research on to see which parole boards are very bad at releasing the wrong people, and that there's some accountability. So people like the Gardi family, go for it. And I hope you sue them for that 18 million. I hope you get it, because maybe that'll make them listen and start to realize we need to change. We need to get experts to advise us on how do we change the parole system. So on my Twitter feed, I regularly, whenever I see people who have offended after being released on parole, I put it there because I feel it's like my mission in life to maybe embarrass correctional services into making changes, because it's an absolute disaster.
Bianca, your view on what the system needs to do with sex offenders. Should they be released out to society on the premise that they have been successfully rehabilitated? And how do you prove that someone is successfully rehabilitated, a sex offender is successfully rehabilitated?
Well, I totally agree with Dr. Labuschagne on that one that he just said. I mean, the parole board currently is not doing their duty properly. So to answer your question is, how are we going to actually implement that if the parole board is not doing their job when it comes to sex offenders? The rehabilitation programs aren't being run properly. Are they registered on the sex offender list? Who's got access to the sex offender list? How will we know as public that person has been registered on the sex offender list and in the community and out there and posing a danger to our society. So this is something that needs to be looked into. I think profiling plays a very big role when it comes to the rehabilitation, releasing sexual offenders on parole, and also that when it comes to our DNA, that their DNA gets logged. Should there be any further crime that they do commit, that the crimes can be linked. So our DNA system needs to start, and I know there's a process currently ongoing to start doing that, another organization fighting for that, but there needs to be a DNA system where it is that the sexual offender's DNA is on a system. If they reoffend, the cases can be linked, but it needs to, the whole system needs to change for this to properly be implemented, and that we can stop this from happening, that our children that are the most vulnerable, that they stop being murdered at the rate that they are currently.
Yeah. Stanley, let's come back to you. And it's a point that was touched upon by Dr. Labuschagne. And it's got to do with children being killed in some instances for muti purposes. And he goes on to say, some people believe it's got to do with religious belief or religious practices. I realize that we don't have a representative from that particular area, and so we'll have to tread very carefully. But what is it that needs to happen for society to change its attitude around this? Yes, the law is one part of it. Perhaps what do we need to see? Do we need more cases that the media follows up on to say this person killed a child for muti purposes and this is the ultimate sentence that they have received, as a way to say this is a deterrent. You are not to do this ever again?
So, I think, what needs to happen, even in one of the landmark cases of the Constitutional Court, the Constitutional Court did state that, in most cases, especially in a violent society, it becomes difficult, especially for family members or any close person, to ensure the safety of the child. But what the law needs to do, the law needs to try and fill that gap. And I think first, we need to recognize that children are the most vulnerable members of our society, and that is, due to their age and their level of maturity, and that they warrant, the utmost protection, whether from, our law enforcement agencies. And I think what needs to be done is that, the manner in which a matter committed or a case committed against a child, it really needs to be approached differently. It really needs to be approached from an angle that, first things first is that the offense was committed against, a relatively defenseless person, and that should be the first approach. And I go back to my earlier statement again to state that we need to probe. Bail should not just be seen as this leeway for a person to commit an offense and be able to be released just because exceptional circumstances existed or because the interest of justice permitted the release of that person. So I guess in this, what we need to do, and I don't have like a clear answer to it, I think we need to start changing the yardstick on the release of bail for people who commit offenses against children. It really needs to be close to impossible for that person to be released. I don't know how we're going to do that, but there needs to be, a certain shift and a certain mindset in our legal system. We shouldn't be hearing about cases of a parent saying that I could not get assistance from the police station because I was informed that I need to go and deal with this matter as a family issue. And, as Bianca stated earlier on, that, some of these offenders are known to the family. Also, family members, they need to stop protecting the uncles. They need to stop protecting the aunts and actually protect the most vulnerable people in our society, which are children. And when these cases are reported, they really need to be taken seriously. The arms of the law really need to start functioning at a speed and also restore its confidence. Because, at the moment, people are losing confidence in the law, to such a point that a father had to jump from bench to bench just to go and try and deal with the person that took his daughter's life. It's becoming, depressing, and it's becoming rather chaotic. And, if we don't change now, the change that we are waiting for might be later rather than soon,
Yeah, and it's so important what you have just said. That father, we remember the father of baby Bokgabo this week, jumping over a bench, trying to get to the alleged perpetrator. But I want to come back to the issue of test cases. Do you remember, Dr. Labuschagne, of a landmark case of a traditional healer who was successfully convicted because of a child that had been killed and the body parts of that child used for muti? Is this what needs to happen for society to remember these things so that our memory of it remains fresh, but also communities sensitized?
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, I worked on quite a few cases when I was in the police where it was confirmed to be a muti murder and the person was convicted and typically sent away for life because it's a premeditated murder. So there are examples of that. But I think the greater thing is that people need to know that, or feel, or fear, should I rather say, that if I do a crime, I'm going to be investigated, caught, identified, caught, and prosecuted and stuck in jail. If people don't fear the legal system, that the police are incompetent or corruptible, or the justice system is not working effectively, it doesn't matter what punishments we have. We can have a death sentence, but if I don't feel like I'm going to get caught, it doesn't matter what the punishment is. So an effective law enforcement system or criminal justice system is essential in deterring people. So in terms of your earlier question, how do we stop, for example, people committing muti murders? Well, we have to have high, important members in our society, politicians, celebrities, speaking out against it. Yeah. We have to have that message going out there all the time that this is not part of traditional belief systems. It's not going to get you what you want. That's the one aspect. And then we have to have a proper policing to know that people feel that, hell, if I do this, I'm going to get caught, and I'm going to get prosecuted, and I'm going to get put away for life. So if we don't have that balance between the message going out that this is not going to get you what you want by very important members of our society, and the fear that you are going to get most likely caught and convicted and sent to jail for life, then we're not going to have we'll never stop it completely, but that's one of the two most important things in actually perhaps reducing the likelihood of this type of crime occurring. And that goes for any crime, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Bianca, back to you. And I like using cases that are quite visible in society. There was a recent story coming out of KZN of a mother who blamed the system for abandoning her child, left the child in the bush, and this child luckily was found alive and taken, I think, to a police station, if not a clinic. But long story short, that mother got arrested because she left a note, though, saying that she had tried to hand over this child because she simply could not take care of it. Again, I'm using an example of a parent who says, I can't take care of this child, and I have tried my level best to try and hand him or her over so that they could have a better life. Perhaps adoption could have been the solution here. I don't know what you are going to ask of me in terms of the framing of this question, but here's an example of a parent in distress or someone who became a parent and they were not ready to. What do we do in those instances? Is there help for those people? Do they know what to do with their children? Because luckily for this child, they were found alive. But what could have happened if they were found by a person with ill intentions?
Yes, now we have seen quite a few of these cases where babies are being dumped in bushes and in bins, and this is very unfortunate. I mean, those are also part of basically murdering of children. There is help out there. There are safe houses, baby safe houses. We can drop off the children. There's an adoption system. The social workers can get involved. It's not right just dropping a child in a bush and leaving a note. I do know of this case, and yes, she did leave a note. She said that she can't take care of her child, but there's alternative measures she could have taken. The adoption system, as I mentioned, but now there's another very fine line that we need to draw. A lot of people actually, when it comes to unwanted children, sell them off into human trafficking, because that's unfortunately something that's also escalated in our country, and especially during COVID. The U.S. Department of State has actually declared South Africa as a human trafficking hub. So we've seen cases where unwanted babies are actually sold off for illegal adoptions or organ trafficking or the sex trade. And that is something we don't want. So we are asking the public out there, if there's any unwanted babies, get the right help. There's a legal adoption system that can assist social workers. Take the baby to your nearest police station where they know who to contact, and put the baby into safe care and a place where the baby will actually be looked after, instead of having that baby being put into a bush or bin and becoming another statistic in South Africa.
Stanley, I want for us to look at the whole system, or look at this system holistically. So we've spoken about parents and what their responsibility ought to be. We've spoken about the bail included in the parole system, and whether or not that is a problem that needs fixing. But let's look at judges. And you've heard the quote from the police minister that I quoted earlier. Now let's look at the behavior of judges. There's a judge or a magistrate in KwaZulu-Natal. Her name, Kollega Bodlani. She is on suspension as we speak. Why? Because she shockingly handed or delivered lenient sentences to rapists. Who monitors judges and what judges should be doing?
Sure. Again, another, rather difficult question. Let me, in terms of, cases normally, especially criminal cases, they normally start at magistrate court level. And we need to understand that according to the system, our magistrates or magistrates courts are creatures of statute. What does that mean? Now, it means that although they have some form of discretion, but they are normally curtailed by the legislation. Now, if Section 60 of the Criminal Procedure Act says that the interest of justice permit the release of accused A because he's a first-time offender, the magistrate has very little space to move, because that magistrate is a creature of statute, and the statute has directed that once it has been proved that this person is a first-time offender and there's no likelihood that they will reoffend once they are released on bail, that magistrate has very little leeway to sort of move around and change that. And now that is different from, the behavior of magistrates who do not look at cases with a careful eye and keep on, like for the example that you just provided right now, where they keep on giving lenient sentences to rapists. And I guess also that, it goes into the training. Just because a magistrate has been in the practice or has been in the judiciary for like 25 years, what is it that we are doing? What are the relevant bodies doing to ensure that these people are regularly being trained? Because the more that society changes, the law also needs to change so that it fits the needs and demands and wants of the society. So a magistrate, for example, who started practicing during the apartheid era, what is it that you have done to ensure that this magistrate is being trained to be able to interpret and apply the law in a constitutional democracy, taking into account the societal needs? So I guess that, I think we can, start looking at the training. Do we have the relevant magistrate sitting in before, a criminal trial? Is this magistrate fit and proper? Are they well equipped to be able to deal with the case of rape? Because if we look at the track record of this magistrate, they've spent 25 years of their practice in the civil court, and now you are making them act in the criminal court. Are they properly trained to appreciate and acknowledge the challenges that come with, presiding in a criminal case. And I think, I'll just leave it at that.
Stanely Malematja, let me thank you very much for your time. Dr. Gerard Labuschagne in studio here, let me thank you very much. We could have continued this conversation, but time is against us. And Bianca van Oswegen, thank you very much for your participation as well to this discussion. This is one area where we cannot fail. We have to continue shining the spotlight. Children are most vulnerable in our society.